It was a cold October morning in the quiet town of Cedar Falls, Iowa. Golden leaves covered the sidewalks, and a gentle breeze carried the smell of fresh coffee from the small cafe. Across the street, 72-year-old Margaret Wilson sat alone by the living room window, holding an old family photo in her hands. The picture showed a smiling little boy sitting on her lap. His name was Daniel. She softly smiled before whispering, "You were so happy back then." Margaret had spent her entire life raising Daniel. After her husband died in a construction accident when Daniel was only 6 years old, she worked 2 jobs to provide everything her son needed. She cleaned offices during the day. She worked at a diner during the night. She slept only a few hours every day, but she never complained. Every dollar she earned went toward Daniel's future. When Daniel wanted to join the school baseball team, Margaret bought him a glove, even though she had to skip buying herself a winter coat. When he dreamed of going to college, she sold her wedding ring to help pay the tuition. She believed every sacrifice was worth it, because she loved her son more than anything. Years passed. Daniel graduated from college with honors. He got a high-paying job in Chicago. Margaret cried tears of happiness during graduation. She hugged him tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she said. Daniel smiled. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom." Those words became Margaret's favorite memory. At first, Daniel called every Sunday, then every other week, then once a month. Eventually, the calls stopped. Margaret told herself he was simply busy. "He has a career now," she would say to her neighbors. "He'll call when he has time." Months became years. One Christmas, she carefully wrapped a handmade scarf she had knitted for Daniel. She mailed it with a heartfelt letter. Weeks later, the package returned unopened. The label read, "Return to sender." Margaret stared at the box for a long time. She didn't cry. She simply placed it inside her closet. Then she smiled sadly. Maybe he moved. But deep inside, she knew something had changed. One afternoon, her neighbor, Mrs. Harper, knocked on the door. "Margaret, why don't you come with us to the community center tonight? They're having music and dinner." Margaret smiled politely. "Thank you, but I'll stay home." Mrs. Harper hesitated. "You shouldn't always be alone." "I'm not alone," Margaret replied softly. "I have memories." That answer broke Mrs. Harper's heart. Meanwhile, nearly 300 miles away in Chicago, Daniel Wilson lived in a beautiful downtown apartment. He drove a luxury SUV. He wore expensive suits. Everyone admired his success. His co-workers believed he had built his life completely on his own. Very few people knew about his mother. Daniel rarely mentioned her. Whenever someone asked about his family, he quickly changed the subject. His wife, Emily, noticed this. One evening, she asked, "Why don't we visit your mom this Thanksgiving?" Daniel sighed. "It's complicated." "Complicated how?" "I've been busy." Emily looked at him carefully. "Busy for 3 years?" Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he walked onto the balcony and stared at the city lights. He remembered something. The last argument. 3 years earlier, Daniel had visited Margaret. She had suggested he slow down and spend more time with family, instead of working every weekend. Daniel exploded. "You don't understand my life." "I'm trying to help," Margaret had replied calmly. "I don't need your advice anymore." Those words came out sharper than he intended. Margaret remained silent. Then she quietly said, "I'll always be here if you need me." Daniel left without hugging her, without saying goodbye, without looking back. Now, standing on the balcony years later, he remembered that moment. For the first time, he felt guilty. Back in Cedar Falls, Margaret's health slowly began to decline. Simple tasks became difficult. Walking upstairs left her breathless. One snowy evening, she slipped while carrying groceries into the house. Fortunately, a young delivery driver named Ethan saw her fall. He rushed over immediately. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Margaret smiled despite the pain. "I think my pride is hurt more than anything." Ethan laughed gently while helping her stand. He carried her groceries inside. Looking around the quiet house, he noticed dozens of framed pictures of Daniel. "Is that your son?" Ethan asked. Margaret's eyes lit up. "Yes, he must visit often." She paused for just a second. "Not lately." Ethan nodded respectfully. Before leaving, he handed her his phone number. "If you ever need groceries or help around the house, just call me." Margaret smiled warmly. "You're a very kind young man." That evening, she placed Ethan's number on the refrigerator. For the first time in months, she didn't feel completely alone. Little did she know, a single phone call would soon change both her life and Daniel's forever. "My son abandoned me," until one phone call changed everything. Part 2. The phone call that changed everything. 3 weeks passed after Ethan helped Margaret with her groceries. Every Saturday morning, he stopped by her small house. Sometimes he brought fresh bread from the local bakery. Other times, he simply sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and listened to her stories. Margaret enjoyed his company. Ethan reminded her that kindness still existed in the world. One chilly afternoon, Ethan noticed Margaret coughing heavily. "You don't look well," he said with concern. "It's only a cold," Margaret replied with a weak smile. "I've lived through 72 winters. I'll survive this one too." But Ethan wasn't convinced. The next morning, he found Margaret sitting quietly in her favorite chair, looking pale and exhausted. "I'm taking you to the hospital," he said firmly. Margaret gently shook her head. "Hospitals are expensive. Your health is more important than money." After several minutes of persuasion, she finally agreed. At the hospital, doctors performed several tests. Hours later, a physician entered the room. "Mrs. Wilson, you've developed pneumonia. You came just in time. Another day or two could have been very dangerous." Ethan felt relieved that he had insisted. The doctor then asked, "Do you have any close family we should contact?" Margaret hesitated. "My son." She slowly gave Daniel's phone number. The nurse dialed the number. It rang several times before someone answered. "Hello? Good afternoon. I'm calling from Cedar Falls Medical Center. Your mother has been admitted to the hospital." There was complete silence. Daniel's face turned pale. "What happened?" "She is stable, but she was seriously ill. We thought you should know." I'll come." For the first time in 3 years, Daniel packed a small bag and left for Iowa. The 4-hour drive felt much longer. Every mile brought back memories. He remembered riding his bicycle while his mother ran beside him. He remembered birthday cakes. She baked from scratch because they couldn't afford bakery cakes. He remembered her cheering at every baseball game, even after working long night shifts. Tears slowly filled his eyes. "What have I done?" he whispered. Back at the hospital, Margaret was resting when Ethan walked into the room. "The doctors say you'll recover." She smiled softly. "I suppose I still have a little fight left in me." Then the door slowly opened. Margaret looked toward the entrance. She froze. Daniel stood there, older, more tired, more nervous than she had ever seen him. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Daniel stepped closer. "Hi, Mom." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Daniel." He knelt beside her bed. "I'm sorry." Those 2 words carried years of regret. Margaret gently touched his face. "You came. I should have come much sooner." She smiled through her tears. "But you're here now." Daniel lowered his head. "I was selfish. I chased promotions, money, and success. I kept telling myself I'd visit next month. Then another month. And another. I thought there would always be more time." Margaret quietly squeezed his hand. Life teaches us that tomorrow isn't guaranteed. Daniel couldn't hold back anymore. He hugged his mother tightly. For the first time in years, both of them cried. Outside the room, Ethan quietly smiled before walking away to give them privacy. Later that evening, Emily arrived with their 8-year-old daughter, Lily. Margaret's eyes widened. "My goodness, you've grown so much." Lily shyly smiled. "Hi, Grandma." Margaret wrapped her granddaughter in a warm embrace. It was the happiest moment she had experienced in years. Emily gently took Margaret's hand. "I've wanted to bring Lily to meet you for a long time." Margaret looked at Daniel. He lowered his eyes. "It was my mistake," he admitted. "I kept everyone apart." Emily nodded. "But we can change that now." The following days became a new beginning. Daniel stayed at the hospital every night. He read books to his mother. He helped nurses whenever they needed assistance. He even laughed with Ethan, thanking him for saving Margaret's life. "If you hadn't been there," Daniel said, "I might have lost my mother forever." Ethan smiled. "She took care of everyone her whole life. I'm glad someone could finally take care of her." Those words stayed with Daniel. After Margaret was discharged, Daniel drove her home. The little house looked exactly the same. Family photographs still covered every wall. Daniel noticed something that broke his heart. Every birthday card he had ever sent as a child had been carefully saved. Every school drawing, every Mother's Day gift, every baseball trophy. His mother had treasured every memory of him, but he had almost forgotten her. That evening, Daniel sat alone on the front porch. The sunset painted the Iowa sky with beautiful shades of orange and pink. Margaret joined him with 2 cups of hot tea. They sat quietly. Finally, Daniel asked, "Do you think you can ever forgive me?" Margaret smiled gently. A mother's heart has room for forgiveness. Daniel looked at her with tears in his eyes. "I don't deserve it." Maybe not, Margaret answered kindly. But forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about love. Daniel realized that despite all his mistakes, his mother's love had never disappeared. It had simply been waiting for him to come home. My son abandoned me until one phone call changed everything. Part 3. Home is where love waits. The weeks after Margaret returned home were unlike anything she had experienced in years. Every Saturday morning, Daniel drove from Chicago to Cedar Falls. At first, he came alone. Soon, Emily and Lily began joining him. Before long, those weekend visits became the happiest tradition in the family. Margaret's quiet house was once again filled with laughter. Lily loved listening to her grandmother's stories. She would sit at Margaret's feet with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, asking endless questions. "Grandma, what was Daddy like when he was my age?" Margaret smiled. "Oh, he was always climbing trees, chasing butterflies, and bringing home injured birds because he wanted to save them." Lily laughed. "Dad? Really?" Daniel blushed. "I hope there are no more embarrassing stories." Margaret winked. "There are plenty." The room filled with laughter. For the first time in many years, Daniel realized what he had been missing. Promotions, bonuses, and expensive possessions had given him comfort, but they had never given him peace. One Monday morning, Daniel walked into his office and asked his manager for a meeting. "I'd like to reduce my travel schedule," he said. His manager looked surprised. "That's unusual. You're one of our top executives." "I know," Daniel replied, "but I've spent years building a successful career while neglecting the people who matter most." Although it meant a smaller salary and fewer opportunities for promotion, Daniel accepted a position that allowed him to spend more time with his family. For the first time in years, he felt truly successful. As autumn slowly turned into winter, Margaret grew stronger every day. She enjoyed baking cookies with Lily, tending to the small flower garden outside her home, and sharing long conversations with Emily over cups of tea. One snowy afternoon, Daniel noticed the old returned package sitting on a shelf in Margaret's closet. It was the Christmas gift she had mailed years earlier. He carefully picked it up. "Mom, is this the scarf you made for me?" Margaret nodded quietly. It came back unopened. Daniel could barely speak. He slowly removed the faded wrapping paper and unfolded the soft blue scarf. It was still perfect. With tears in his eyes, he wrapped it around his neck. "It's the best gift I've ever received," he whispered. Margaret gently touched his shoulder. "I made it with love, and I was too foolish to see it." A few days before Christmas, Daniel gathered everyone in the living room. "I have an announcement." Margaret looked curious. "What is it?" Daniel smiled. "I've bought a house just 20 minutes from here." Margaret's eyes widened. "You're moving back?" "We all are." Emily squeezed his hand. "We want Lily to grow up close to her grandmother." Margaret covered her face as tears rolled down her cheeks. "I never thought I'd have my family back." Daniel knelt beside her. "You never lost us. I lost my way." Christmas morning arrived with fresh snow covering the town. The fireplace crackled softly, while holiday music played in the background. The dining table overflowed with homemade food: pies, warm bread, roasted turkey, and Margaret's famous apple pie. Neighbors, including Mrs. Harper and Ethan, joined the celebration. Daniel stood and raised his glass. "I'd like to thank someone," he turned toward. His mother. "When I was a little boy, my mother gave me everything she had. She worked long hours. She sacrificed her dreams. She believed in me even when I didn't deserve it. I spent years chasing success and forgot the person who made that success possible." He paused, struggling to hold back his emotions. "Mom, thank you for never giving up on me." The room fell silent. Margaret stood and hugged her son. "You found your way home. That's all I've ever wanted." Even Ethan wiped away a tear. Months later, Daniel started volunteering at a local senior center every weekend. He met many elderly parents whose children rarely visited. Each conversation reminded him of how close he had come to making the greatest mistake of his life. One afternoon, he spoke to a group of young professionals. "They asked me what the secret to success is," he said. "I used to think success meant a bigger paycheck or a nicer car." He smiled toward Margaret, who was sitting proudly in the front row. "Now I know. Success means having someone waiting to welcome you home." The audience applauded. Margaret smiled with quiet pride. As the sun set over Cedar Falls, 3 generations of the Wilson family gathered on the porch. Lily held her grandmother's hand. Daniel stood beside them. Emily leaned against his shoulder. No one spoke for a while. They simply watched the sky turn shades of gold, orange, and purple. Finally, Margaret broke the silence. "Life gives us many second chances." Daniel nodded. "The important thing is having the courage to take them." Years later, when people asked Lily what her favorite childhood memory was, she always gave the same answer. It wasn't a vacation or a birthday. It was every Saturday at Grandma's house, where I learned that love never keeps score. Forgiveness is stronger than pride, and home is the place where hearts find each other again. And from that day forward, Daniel never let another week pass without telling his mother 4 simple words that meant everything. "I love you, Mom."